All right, it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for a little free therapy.
Yes, each week we like to check in with our friend, psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders, and we're talking about a topic that maybe you're hearing and seeing a lot on social media, and that is narcissism. It's a word that's really thrown around a lot, but what does it really mean, and how do you know if you're really dealing with one? Welcome, Dr. Saunders.
How are you?
I am well. Hello, friends. Happy Wednesday. And yes, we're talking about narcissism because it is a word that you hear a lot in the media. And there's books out there dealing with a narcissistic personality. But I think it's one of those overused words, and I'm not sure that people truly understand what it means.
Well, what does it mean? Can we get into the definition here?
Yes. So it's individuals who have an overwhelming sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, grandiose self-importance, and an excessive need for admiration, constantly putting themselves, to the top of everything or trying to get all the attention for themselves. But there's a difference between a personality disorder and personality traits as well.
Okay, so let's talk about that. A lot of times there'll be people that you say, oh, that person has a narcissistic personality disorder, and you can't be in relationship with a person like that. It's just going to be detrimental to you. How would you know if someone had a narcissistic personality disorder?
So, as you mentioned, a personality is made up of unique traits. We all have unique traits. A personality disorder is when someone's traits cause distress or negatively impact the world around them. So while we might know people who have some narcissistic traits, they might kind of have a greater sense of entitlement, or they might be a little overly grandiose in their self-importance. But do those traits really impact their relationships? That's the difference.
People with a personality disorder display more rigid thinking and reacting behaviors that make it hard for them to adapt to a situation.
Right. So they're not adaptable. So they present themselves the same in every single situation. Look, we all can think about people in the media who display narcissistic personalities, and whether or not it's a disorder is for their psychiatrists or psychologists to diagnose, not for us to diagnose. But there are a lot of those things. And these individuals, they can only be around people who are equally of importance. They either glorify or demonize people. They're very arrogant, and really significantly, they lack empathy for other people.
Okay. So, yeah, I've heard that, a narcissist is only going to see how you make them feel. They don't really see how you feel. So one day you could be the most awesome person in their life. The next day they hate you. And so that can be difficult. But what causes it? How do you know?
Is it genetic?
I mean, as parents, we don't want to grade our kids to be like that.
Right. I think there's, like a lot of things, there's multiple causes. I think there is certainly some genetic influence in your personality traits. I mean, you can look at your infant child, and because we call it temperament in children, we call it personality in adults, but you can look at your infant child or your toddler, and they have a lot of temperamental traits already. You're kind of born with some of them. But it's often environments, obviously abuse or neglect can really be a factor. Other risk factors is overly glorifying your child instead of, giving them a moderate amount of expectations and responsibility. But there's often some genetic influences that I always like to account for.
And is there do people become narcissists, or is it a trait that we're finding in children and they grow up with it, or it tends to take place more in adulthood?
Well, we see it, or we diagnose it in adulthood, but you can certainly see some narcissistic-like traits in childhood and adolescence, in terms of being overly grandiose, and again, lacking empathy and lacking what we call theory of mind. Theory of mind is that ability to, detect and read someone else's feelings and emotions. And when you're so overly involved with yourself, you lack the ability to read someone else's emotions.
Now, you say the root of the narcissistic personality disorder or personality is really deep insecurity?
Right. That's the thing. That's the little trick that I like to remind people when they're dealing with someone with a narcissistic personality is remember that individual is actually overcompensating for a deep feeling of insecurity. So that's the little trick that I like to remind people is they're actually incredibly insecure. They're just overcompensating.
Interesting. Very interesting topic. Do you come across a lot of narcissists?
I come across a fair amount of narcissists. Yes.
Before we run out of time, let me just ask you really quickly. You know what? I'll save it. I'm going to say, how do we deal with the narcissist? What if there's one in your life?
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
We're going to save it for Kara's Cures, and we're going to take a deeper dive into narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder on the Kara's Cures show and podcast. Thanks, Dr. Saunders.
Have a great day.
All right, you too.